Welcome to this edition of Uncomfortable Collisions with Reality with a regular guest, Jared Wheatley. He is the founder and CEO of PIC, Professional Individualised Care. He can correct that if he wants to.
No need to correct.
No need to correct. Okay, so I got it right. He looks after kids who are in out-of-home care, and we've been discussing the question of risk off camera, and so I suggested we start doing it on camera. Over to you, Jared.
Yeah, it's an interesting area, and it's one that in out-of-home care and child protection, I don't think I'm aware of another area in our society where we're more anxious and we're more worried, and for good reason. You know, if the system's involved, there's things that are going on that are not okay. And when organisations get involved like mine, so we're a statutory provider of out-of-home care here in New South Wales, there is risk everywhere. These young people have lives that have risks both of them being harmed, them harming others, them interacting with the community, but also organisational risk if you want to work with them. And so I'm working in an environment where everyone talks about the problem of people being too risk adverse and the need for us to be brave and put the decisions of the child first. But I guess in my daily reality, both as a CEO and a principal officer that has certain responsibilities under the regulator, which in New South Wales is the Office of the Children's Guardian. So I experience it as an individual when I'm trying to make decisions in my organisation. And I observe it taking place, this tension that's playing out between us following what a good parent would do or what we might do for our niece and nephew in looking after children, versus if we're in the system and we're tasked with looking after these children, the different actions we take to make sure that liability and the organisational risk is covered.
So I think you should take us the next step and explain a situation where that question arises.
Yeah, I was speaking just last Friday with Bernie Shakeshaft, who runs an organisation called Backtrack in Armidale in New South Wales. And he was talking to me about training youth workers. And he's saying after you put them through all the training, I tell them that if they get caught and they don't know what to do and they can't think back to any of their training what to do, I tell them, what would you do if it was your niece or nephew? And I love this. I think this is really good advice for people when they're finding their feet in the sector, is to try and remember our humanity and try and remember, if you deeply cared about this person and you're invested in their life, how would you act to try and create safety, but also not to escalate things, further they need to go. And so it's on the basis of that, how that looks in, I'll give you a specific example would be, you've got a young person who has some low-level criminality, and you understand it in the context of their trauma and how they're looking to survive, and they've got in trouble, some small things with the law, and they might have bail conditions. Now, if this young person has been doing well, let's say for 6 months, for a period of time, however, they quote unquote abscond, they run away, and in out-of-home care, within 2 hours, you're meant to, put in an incident report and do a missing persons report with the police. And by doing that, you're going to breach their bail conditions. And this is one that if you know that child's life and know where it is, sometimes it might be absolutely appropriate to follow that process and to follow the guidelines. There might be other times, though, that if it was your own child, you knew all of the circumstances and you knew that the police weren't going to go out and look for the child, it wasn't going to create any safety. All that lodging this will do is make sure that the organisation's covered, that if anything goes wrong while they're away, we can say, well, they weren't in our care, they were missing. But what it will have is a negative result on the people on the ground, because the child will get breached for their bail conditions in this case, and it might have, you could lay in any one of the negative consequences that might have in their life. And so I'm not saying here there's a right and wrong, don't breach a child for their bail conditions. Certainly not what I'm saying, but there are certain circumstances where that won't be in the child's best interest or in our best interest as a society. And a parent may act in a certain way to make those discretionary decisions. But as soon as a child's life migrates into a system, in this case, the out-of-home care system, there isn't a parent in control of those decisions. Their parents have been sidelined. And who is in control of those decisions are people like myself, who are CEOs of organizations, who breed a culture within an organization to tell people how to respond in those instances. Whose needs are greater, the child's or the people on the ground, or the organization's needs?
Yeah, so very provocative, very interesting question. One of the things that puts me in mind of, which may surprise you, is Warren Buffett. Do you know why it puts me in mind of Warren Buffett?
Tell me.
Because, well, Warren Buffett is famous for saying something very similar, which is he says to the fellow shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway, the big box of investments that he runs, and he owns a share of a chunk of these shares in Berkshire Hathaway. And he says, I intend to manage Berkshire Hathaway as an owner. Now, he is an owner of Berkshire Hathaway, but I'm not sure how much of Berkshire Hathaway he owns, 20%, 30%, whatever it is. And virtually all other asset managers do not manage the assets as if they were owners. They manage the assets as if they were asset managers. And as an asset manager, they are trying to make a profit. They're in competition with other asset managers. And again, I don't think I took this term from Warren Buffett, but Warren Buffett is another person doing rather better than me, but he uses the same expression I do, which is the institutional imperative. And what he's talking about is a completely different institutional imperative to the ones that you encounter with governments. What he's talking about is the institutional imperative in business to grow. And that institutional imperative arises out of senior managers and boards sitting above their executives and their managers and saying, how much have you grown the business? And Buffett doesn't believe in growth for growth's sake. He believes in managing or husbanding capital in the most to get at the highest return he can. Sometimes that will mean growth. Sometimes it will not mean growth. It will mean sit around and not buy stuff because it's too expensive or it's not the sort of thing that we're good at or whatever. So I think it's actually a pretty fertile way to think about this situation, because I raised this term, the institutional imperative, because it's an imperative. So my message is not, let's all be kind of child revolutionaries and forget that there's a system, or just slag off the system. There's plenty to slag off the system about, but the system has to do certain things. It mucks up the way it does them, but it still has to do them. So the system is sitting at the top of this system of out-of-home care, at the top of it. So if we talk about the system as the Department of DCJ in New South Wales, Department of Communities and Justice, there is a minister. The minister can be asked questions in Parliament, and it is a reasonable thing to say, maybe those people shouldn't put their job ahead of all other things and ahead of their humanity, but if we've got a system that requires all these people to be self-sacrificing heroes and they get chucked out of their jobs, well, that doesn't describe a system. That describes a big mess. So that, sorry. I thought so that's why I call it the institutional imperative. But you go, and then I'll say a bit more.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, where we're not. I don't think it's reasonable for us or anyone, particularly if we're outside of the system and how it's functioning, to say, it's easy to change and this doesn't make sense. I think it always makes sense how a system's behaving. Whether we like the outcome of that, it's completely different. But the system is doing what the system needs to do to protect itself, and we're part of the system.
And so let me rephrase that and see if you accept this rephrasing, which is the system is doing something which it has to do, and it's also protecting itself. And the two things are not carefully separated in its own mind. And so doing what it's doing to protect itself displaces the thing that it really must be doing, which is to have a systematic answer to anyone who says, why did that child die?
Yeah. And this is where I use that analogy of the staircase, where, our job, I see my job, my primary role as to help play, be a useful role in helping to raise the children that are in our organization's care.
Yeah.
And in that role, your job is to get the kids up the flight of stairs and into independence. And you can have two handrails along each side of that and make sure they don't fall off either side, and it's useful. That is what you're speaking about in my mind. There
Yeah.
are certain needs that we can't have kids fall off, and we need to put things in place. However, if you put up a third or fourth or a 15th or a 16th or a 21st handrail on that staircase, you haven't actually improved safety. You haven't actually improved the outcome for the child. All you've done is create things that we can point to cover off on liability. So I do think dividing these things out from each other are very helpful because we can meet the system's needs
Yes.
in a far more lean fashion than we're currently doing. And those other handrails that we've got in place, they might make the system feel more safe, but they're not creating any additional safety. So when
Yes.
I'm at that point of tension in my work, and I know I'm leaving the two handrails up on the side of the staircase, but I'm directing my staff to, move ahead without, I'll be upfront about it, to break some rules and to make sure we're doing things on the ground that we think are fitting with what people actually need. You have to, in my mind, do it transparently. So you're not doing it behind closed doors. You're telling people up front that this number 16 handrail, we're not following it in this occasion. We understand the risks, and we're going to go ahead anyway. And to me, that's the compromise I've been able to find in saying, we do have to meet those needs, but when we're not going to meet them fully, or when we're not going to meet them in every context to the degree to which the system would like, then let's be transparent about our practice.
Yeah. So look, this is manna from heaven as I listen to it. Sweet words indeed, because it's exactly the way in which I talk about a system's the best possible form of transparency is a system of transparency throughout an organization, beginning with self-transparency. And the process of self-transparency that you've described is exactly, in principle, you may not get to the right answer, but in principle, it is exactly the best thing you can do, which is to accept that the system needs to have a systematic response. The guardrails are the rules they've got there already, which is 2 hours, you have to do this. And what it doesn't have, I'm assuming from what you've said, is that it doesn't give you proper authority to say in a transparent, properly reasoned way, it is in the interests of the kids we're looking after, it is in the interests of an effective system, which means a lower cost system almost always, and it is in the wider interests of the system, even if it is not in the immediate, even if it doesn't completely minimize the risk in the immediate short term, so that the system can't say, oh yes, we reported it, it's off our hands. Well, you only have to look at that to say that that doesn't sound like a very promising way to go. So it's perfect. I mean, I think you have provided a working example of what I've been talking about for a couple of decades. There is a report that I wrote in a completely different area of government policy, but it was in the area of regulation and over-regulation, and it spoke in very similar terms. So we have a system all around the world. Most of the OECD countries, the wealthier countries, have a system which is farcically ineffective. It's called regulation impact statements. The idea is to reduce ineffective regulation. In fact, it doesn't do that. It simply provides a new checklist where they just go through a series of things and write out a regulatory impact statement to enable themselves to regulate however they want. And what should be happening is that they should be thinking of a regulatory system as a bit like a Toyota factory, which is a very complicated, many moving parts type of system, trying to do a difficult thing, trying to get more knowledgeable about it, more skillful in doing it every day. It will have some clear lines, it will have some discretion, and will constantly be trying to learn from the exercise of its discretion, and it will be doing that with candid self-transparency. And well, I think governments have got a long way to go, but I think you've provided a perfect example of the sort of thing I think they should be pursuing, not just in the very difficult area that you practice in, but in so many other areas that governments get involved in?
I think this is where there wouldn't be too many people if you bring up a specific example and you tell them about a child's life. They'll say, obviously, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, good parenting isn't revolutionary. But in
Yeah.
the system, if you want to hold that line,
Yes.
it does become quite, I don't want to say provocative, let's say.
Yeah.
If you want to
Yeah.
hold that position, you can quickly be typecast or put into a situation where someone, it's like you're making trouble for the system.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you do that, if you get the decision right, you break the rules in inverted commas, and it works out for everyone involved, everyone's pretty fine with it. But if you have to make 10 decisions in people's lives where you're making it in a space where the answer is sometimes ultimately unknowable.
Of course.
If 1 out of 10 it doesn't work out, it's on that case that you're going to get crucified in the system.
Yeah.
Not on the cases where, kind of transparently bending the rules to be in the best interests of the people you're trying to represent. That's not the ones where the heat comes. But it's interesting, Nicholas, that in my experience, that even on that 1 out of 10, when you expect everyone to come to you and say, why did you take these actions? And these are the rules and we have them there for a reason. My experience so far has been, as long as I've been transparent from day dot on the decision I'm making, and as long as I haven't hidden anything, and as long as I am basing on that higher principle of these are people's lives, this is the data we had, this is the decision we made for these reasons.
Yeah.
So far, my experience has been that we're unnecessarily afraid of consequences. It's like we've got a boogeyman in mind where then more often than not, people, even within those systems, will look at it. And even if there's a bit of huff and puff, there's people, move on.
Yes, but I think we can do. That doesn't surprise me. Most people in many of these systems want to do a good job, but I think we can do better, which is to ask them to systematize this, the action outside the guardrails, not to let it through and say, yes, we'll turn a blind eye, but to say, yes, that's a policy that we're thinking about, that we're wanting to understand better. So thanks for that. And if you want to be on our working group to keep processing this so that the system can do all of the things that it needs to do without, and also acknowledge the thing you've acknowledged, which is that that so many of these things are unknowable in real time, and that people should be encouraged to make the best judgments they can, collect the best data and the best, have the best information systems they can. I might just add, and I think maybe I'll certainly give you a chance to have your say, but we're trying to keep this to about 20 minutes, and I wanted to just conclude by observing something that I was wondering about, and that was when Tesla released its car, which had far more ambitious AI driver support, artificial intelligence driver support. I thought, okay, I wonder what's going to happen when they have the first crash that kills someone on driver support, because of course we know how the media will, the media won't go, oh, that's very interesting. I wonder if that's cost effective, or I wonder if that's risk increasing or risk minimizing. They'll just go, crash, and they'll write it up as a big drama. And you may remember what happened was the Tesla's sensors looked at a semi-trailer in front of the car and said, that's a sign and you can drive under it. And you couldn't drive under it. It was an absolutely terrible story, and the person died. Tesla had obviously thought about this, and in the process of reporting this, they were transparent, I believe, and in the process of reporting this, they also released their data which supported the proposition that they just killed someone. This system had just killed someone. And by the way, it probably had saved 90 lives or whatever it was. And there's the data, because people driving Teslas had that many fewer fatal accidents than a control group, presumably statistically assembled, who weren't driving, who didn't have that support. So that's the other, and that's again a way for systems to try to take on board these difficult questions and do the best they can as systems to help everyone make as good decisions as they can in real time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if I was, my closing remarks here would be to have people think for a moment how it feels. How does
Yes.
it feel when you're on the other end of the system? Because
Yeah,
we've been
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
this in abstracts, the
Yeah,
system
yeah,
out there, it's big. But just for a moment in closing to say we've all had experiences in our life, whether it was going into the old RTA before it was Service New South Wales,
yes,
or people filling out Centrelink forms, or it might be any number. At the moment I'm looking to get daycare positions for my daughter, and
yes,
any number of times when if you're on the other end of a system that has looked to control risk in any way, and you realize that it doesn't fit in your personal
yes,
circumstances, how
yes.
humanizing that is.
Yep,
And there are whole sways of our community, our society, that we have perpetually living in these systems where their day-to-day experience is day-to-day humiliation. And that might sound like strong language, but I'd just ask people for a moment to reflect on what it feels like when we even get the smallest of tastes. And
absolutely.
and for those that are living where, like children in out of home care, where your whole life is at the mercy of systems that are looking to make sure that its needs are met before your needs are met. And
Yep,
that has to trickle down from, like you described, Nicholas, from minister to secretary to DepSecs, right the way through the department to principal officers and CEOs to case managers and caseworkers.
yep,
And it has to have gone through all of those filters
yep,
and be an acceptable level of risk,
yep,
before it can get to your lived experience.
yep.
So when these children feel like I'm not listened to, some of that is this concept of risk played out on a
Yes,
human
yes,
level.
yes. I'm now going to have another last word, just because, well, it doesn't have to be the last word either, but just because it's occurred to me. So imagine a situation where someone is hauled up before the system because they didn't follow the rule. Wouldn't it be nice? It's just a thought I have, which is that the body that hears them is informed by people with experience in the system, in the field. And I'm thinking of something like a citizen jury, of course, because I always do, as a method of detoxifying these systems that humiliate from the top down, if I can put it that way. So that you might say, these are the rules. An ideal system is, these are the rules. This is what we want you to do when you make an exception, and you have to make your reasoning and what information you had transparent to yourself and the system as you break the rules, or as you decide to vary the rule in that case. And then if there is a further deliberative process, it involve some people who will be asking themselves the question from the right point of view, which is ultimately the kids' interest and the interests of people working in the system who are trying to do the best job they can. Rather than someone who will be part of that logic of protecting the institution.
Yeah. And the hardest thing in all of this is to recognize in all of our day jobs, in all of our roles, no matter where we are, it's nice to look at the system as the external, but, I think everyone is inevitably in their workplaces, probably part of similar processes.
Yes, exactly.
Understand how we can use our own influence to try and shift that.
Yep.
I think that a key part of that is at least naming it and giving language to it and understanding it, observing it, seeing when it is not helpful on the ground, and times when we have to be honest and say, okay, some of that it made us stop, it made us think about risk, and that was helpful. So these things aren't black and white, but I don't think there's no doubt in my mind anyway that the balance of our relationship to risk is out of whack, and that's having negative consequences for those that are living in these systems.
All right, Jared. Now I will. Let's finish there, but I will observe that we've gone outside our own guardrails, which were to talk for 20 minutes. So I'm expecting a report. I'm expecting a report on my desk by tomorrow morning explaining the data that you had, the information according to which you decided to keep talking for 27 minutes and 6 seconds and counting. And I'll do the same. I'll send you a report, and we'll deliberate further. But until we speak again, thank you as always. And thank you to those people who have continued to listen to this conversation for its full 27 minutes and 27 seconds. Thank you.